I was thinking about Pokemon, and I thought it would be interesting to do a breakdown of Pokemon designs by generation, because there is always discussion going on as to which generation had the best Pokemon designs and which Pokemon are just best designed in general. So I wanted to see how this played out through all the various generations and the hundreds of Pokemon that have been introduced throughout the franchise, because generally what we see is newer Pokemon fans, they try to find less flaws in the 5th generation, and outside of that, it seems to be a pretty even distribution. So I want to know what you guys think. Comment down below, which generation do you think overall has the best Pokemon designs, or at least the most designs that you appreciate compared to other generations, and I want to just kind of start getting into this. So first off, Generation 1. The reason why I feel Pokemon is as successful as it is today is because Generation 1 brought an incredible foundation to what Pokemon is. That pretty much you can look at Generation 1, see these guys introduced, and think, yep, that's Pokemon, because the ideas work. Pretty much everything you encounter makes sense from the idea of a Pokemon adventure. You're a kid going out into the world that has some pretty fantastic creatures inside of it. Sure, some of them are going to be mundane, but not everything is going to evolve equally. Not everything is going to be this overtuned, crazy thing that you're going to encounter. You know, you might just see a large bug. You might see a dog-looking thing that has a slight little bit of a special attribute, but for the most part, I think there's something enjoyable about nearly every Pokemon, and even the ones that are flawed, they're flawed for a reason. Because, like, okay, some people might be like, well, Jinx looks stupid, or there's a lot of Pokemon kind of in the middle that people tend to not really care too much about, but when you break it down, it's like, okay, Grimer's just a pile of sludge, but it makes sense for the world, that it builds the world, and you can't have everything be perfect and flawless, especially with the first take at a concept. But I think when you look at the overall world, the world is built pretty well, that we have all these elements represented in many different ways, that, you know, you see various different types of water, you see various different types of grass, and then even into like more human-like Pokemon and stuff like that. So I think it did pretty well. And even then, as a whole, I guess if you're just skimming over this, kind of looking back on Pokemon, you might not initially think like, oh hey, there's a lot of cool Pokemon designs in here, but as I was kind of breaking it down, it's like, yeah, there's actually a lot of cool Pokemon designs that still just kind of stick around from the first generation. That Charizard, we got this dragon-looking Pokemon that breathes fire, and it's like a flying lizard, crazy flamethrower thing. So yeah, that's going to be something that the kids enjoy. But then there's also a lot of elegant and cool designs as well. Like we have Ninetales. Ninetales are just awesome. Like growing up, Ninetales is a cool Firefox kind of Pokemon, and even then, some of the more odd Pokemon, I really appreciated as a kid. I still do today. Like, I love Dugtrio. Going into the Diglett cave and actually seeing Diglett and Dugtrio, that's awesome. Plus, just how they function. Like, Pokemon Snap, always try to get pictures of the Dugtrio, because I think it's just interesting. That even if there's something that has a simplistic design, that doesn't mean it's bad. That if the rest of the lore behind the Pokemon or other concept of design can make the Pokemon interesting, then it works out. Like, you look at that, it's kind of odd, and a lot of people don't like Dugtrio, but it works as a Pokemon. I think that's what the first generation got down. And then we have some other ideas like Porygon, because when you think about it, the concept of Pokemon is like the early 90s is when this started developing as just like capturing bugs and stuff like that. But at that time, the world had really never seen anything like that. And a lot of these concepts, they really evolved in some pretty crazy stuff, because like the technology era was kind of up and coming and booming, so we were getting real life representation as well as these crazy things that could never exist. I feel that found a really good balance, that there was charming Pokemon, there were flawed Pokemon, there were cool Pokemon, and then there were average Pokemon that just built up the world, which is something fairly successful, and even some other really exaggerated Pokemon. Like, I love Sandslash. Sandslash is a really cool guy, and again, Pokemon Snap, getting to see it in Pokemon Stadium or getting to play with the Pokemon itself. Like, we have this hedgehog porcupine thing that plays in the mud, digs super fast, and then tears things up with its claws. I think that's actually pretty cool. So first generation makes a lot of sense, and then we get into second generation. Now, I see quite a bit of criticism from the second generation. Like, whenever it's not Gen 1 versus Gen 5, people do think that the second generation is a fairly weak generation, and the thing is, with some of the designs, again, we're kind of playing in that plainness that we found in parts of the first generation of Pokemon, but the reason why I feel that the early generations of Pokemon were very successful is because they didn't force anything. That this is just about the world. This is just about fun creatures that you might encounter in what Pokemon is, instead of trying to create something to turn Pokemon into something else, which is kind of what we start seeing in the future generations. That this is the more humble beginnings of Pokemon, and I think that one way to describe Generation 2 is whimsical. I think that even though there's, again, like Pokemon designs that don't really make the most sense or don't really feel like they're the coolest thing ever, like Sunkern into Sunflora, very forgotten Pokemon. I think another reason why people don't like Generation 2 is because a lot of the forgotten Pokemon live in this generation because, alright, we got Spinarak, Gyarados, we got spooky, creepy spider things going on, Ladybug, Ladian, and the thing is, this also wasn't a very competitive generation, that we also find a very low amount of competitive used Pokemon, so they kind of just drop off the radar. I feel one interesting way of describing the second generation is it's like the normal type gym of generations, that it's fairly just neutral across the board, but I can really appreciate that because it built on the foundation, just kind of added on, and it didn't try to do anything extra crazy on top of that, but it still kept Pokemon, and that's why I feel that it's a whimsical way of experiencing new Pokemon and kind of encountering the way that this world is supposed to develop. And then we got some pretty awesome Pokemon. Like, Lugia is still my favorite Pokemon. So the legendaries, when they really tried to get these over-the-top designs, that was pretty cool. And then there's also a lot of baby Pokemon and some extra building off of existing Pokemon that really didn't take it super far. It's like, okay, cool, Horsey Seadra didn't really get too much development in the first generation, becoming Kingdra, but Kingdra's still not like this over-the-top, even for a Dragon-type Pokemon, thing that stands out. But it does build the world and it does work out. Scizor, that's a big fan favorite. So there's also a lot of people's favorites in the second generation, but overall they just feel underwhelmed by the generation itself. And then we get to the third generation, where I feel immediately we are already seeing some drastic changes in Pokemon design, mostly from the starters. That these starter Pokemon, they each feel more individual. They feel more developed, more evolved in their own way. You can kind of see the personality of Trico, Torchic, and Mudkip just through the design before you actually get to experience them through the anime, games, and other media. Also, the evolutions were a lot more impactful, and I feel it was more balanced. That when it came to the first generation, more Charmander, more Squirtle fans. Second generation, more Totodile, more Cyndaquil fans. But third generation had the most even split because you had crazy Swamp Monster, you had Fighting Chicken before firefighting became a meme, and Blaziken actually has a really cool, powerful design that if you wanted to be that kid that just showed off your power, you had it. Swampert had a bit more of that passive aggression, not like a weird passive-aggressive insult kind of way, but it developed into something that looked strong, but it didn't immediately come off as like, yeah, I'm ready to fight and be strong. And then Sceptile was the more laid-back, cool, but agile, powerful lizard Pokemon that had a little bit of that dragonness going on with it. So I think that was pretty cool. And yeah, just kind of looking at the development and the treatment of the starter Pokemon, already starting off with a big change. And then we see a different take in design, I feel, on the third generation. That for the most part, we also lost a lot of Pokemon fans around this time for many different reasons. For starters, Pokemon wasn't getting as much promotion in the mainstream. That it took over the world for the first generation, still became this like massive late 90s, early 2000s media hog for Pokemon second generation, but after that, the trend kind of fell off, and I feel it was just a societal thing. That except for like Mario and Zelda, there was no idea of a trend lasting very long. Also, the game wasn't as developed. With 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th generations, there's reasons for older players to stay into the game because it gets competitive, it's explored, there's a lot of depth, but this wasn't really something as common or as accepted back in the third generation, so naturally if you were a Gen 1, Gen 2 player, you saw these designs, you could think they were cool. Like, there were still some really awesome Pokemon, there were still things to fall in love with in the third generation. A lot of people like Flygon, Zangoose is pretty cool, there's Armaldo, Milotic, yeah, there's a lot of really cool designs, especially going into the movie. Like, Pokemon Heroes, I love Latios and Latias. The legendary Pokemon are very powerful and strong. Metagross, Salamence, we get 2 pseudo-legendary Pokemon. So the list goes on in cool things you can find in the third generation, but for the most part, it was just a kid's game. That if you were still playing Pokemon as you were growing up, it got more outcasted. So I don't think that, while the designs did kind of turn some people off, it is this big shift. It was different yet the same. Pokemon didn't take this leap into Digimon territory, but at the same time, it looked like something different was happening, that it wasn't the same humble Pokemon, and it did take a step up in a different direction that some people didn't like, but I think that's also about the region. Because when you think about it, Johto and Kanto, those regions are connected, so roughly, you can kind of keep these same basic designs of the Pokemon intact, but when we go to this new island, it was a more tropical setting. They were trying to really play on the area and how the Pokemon develop in that area, instead of just, hey, here's a Pokemon. Maybe it's cool, maybe it's not. So we got this more diversity. We got a big change for Pokemon. Some people liked it, some people didn't. So I'd still consider the third generation successful, but a lot of weird things outside of Pokemon's control kind of affected it, and the designs are a lot different than what we saw with the previous generations. Now, for Generation 4, I feel it was a step back when it came to the starter Pokemon. That kind of didn't like any of the starter choices. I just defaulted to Piplup because water was cool and it was a penguin. Did not like Chimchar at all. Just keep monkeys out of my game, please, Game Freak. And Turtwig, dumb grass turtle. At least in my, like, I'm okay with, like, Turtwig, Grotle, Torterra, but when I first saw it as Generation 4 was new, when I was in middle school, I was just like, ain't having it. This is again where we saw, like, a new freshness inside of Pokemon, that the individual Pokemon that were introduced that were for the region, they had, again, it felt whimsical. It felt like Generation 2 again, that we were finding some bright, fresh new designs, and for the most part, they still worked out pretty well. But then we also had some really cool, again, trying to push coolness, trying to really get this awesome factor going on in Pokemon like Garchomp, Lopunny, all these Pokemon that are going to stick in your mind for a while, while also paying tribute to the original Pokemon, Honchkrow, so an evolution of Murkrow. Murkrow, I've always liked Murkrow. Murkrow is like a really cheeky, annoying Pokemon. It gets prankster, which really exemplifies that. But watching the Pikachu brothers, the Pikachu short from the second Pokemon movie, like, it's just a jerk crow that exists in the world, and again, it builds the world in a simple but nice way. Also, like, it looks like a witch, and it kind of has like this black cat Halloween aura around it. So I think that's a cool design element that really makes the Pokemon succeed. Honchkrow, so we're evolving on that, and we're turning it into like a mob boss kind of Pokemon. Hippowdon, hey, we finally see a hippo. So we saw a lot more new designs. We saw a lot more growth with existing things in the real world, kind of getting the Pokemon treatment, but also just some cool stuff overall. A couple more baby Pokemon, pre-evolution, stuff like that, and then more evolutions that really take the simple designs and really push it to the next level. Togekiss, I mean, Togepi, Togetic, when is that thing going to be cool? Hey, Togekiss is actually pretty awesome. Magmortar, Electivire, kind of taking Electabuzz and Magmar, not really the most fan-loved Pokemon, being like, hey, here's the reason why you could like them, because they're powerful now. Right here, so we got to see a lot of that growth and development. Frostlass, one of my favorite Pokemon ever, gets introduced. Rotom, one of my favorite Pokemon. I think one way of thinking about it is difference creates definition. That they could either just introduce a new evolution to an old Pokemon at any time, but also they can expand the bubble of Pokemon. Maybe that was the thing. Like, people weren't expecting the bubble to be expanded, but the 4th generation, that's where it all paid off, and now it's like, okay, Game Freak's kind of free to do whatever they want, and they can make some really cool Pokemon designs. Lucario, ultimate fan service, fan favorite Pokemon, just edgy fighting dog that brought in steel typing and stuff like that, ended up getting Mega Evolution, and just a lot of, yeah, there's a lot of fan favorites in here that kind of push designs, elegance, and stuff like that. And then we get to the 5th generation, and it is just terrible. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. One of the big reasons why I'm making this video is because I was thinking about how critical I've been of the 5th generation recently, which has brought on a new wave of hate. Now, the funny thing is, people are saying, oh, I miss the old Verlisify who just loved everything about Pokemon and never put players down, even though that's just a complete falsehood, because my channel started off against Smogon and the toxicity that's brought, which has just gotten worse over time, and I've always been against 5th generation. Black and White 2 are the only games I've never finished in Pokemon, and Black and White was an absolute struggle because I dreaded every single patch of tall grass that I encountered in the game because I knew I was going to run into some garbage that did not feel like Pokemon because I was not playing a Pokemon game. That's why that interview, the methodical destruction of Pokemon Black and White, that's the reason why I've been so critical recently, is because it cemented all my feelings. It's like, oh, so many people say I'm wrong, maybe there's something about it. That's why I did the video. If I looked at all the generations, if I saw the good, the bad, the ugly, I tried to figure out what was successful, what the idea was. Maybe I'd find something I liked about Generation I didn't like. Maybe I'd find something I didn't like about Generation I did like or thought I liked. I would maybe change my mind on the 5th generation if I just looked at things differently. But nothing has changed about the 5th generation because of this video. I went through it, I tried, and it just brought back all those bad memories where it was like I did not enjoy any aspect. Like the Desert Resort. That place was just miserable. I think the Desert Resort kind of captures how whenever you stumble into something, it's not going to be a Pokemon. It's also where we get into that debate. It's like, well, you can compare X Pokemon Generation 5 to X Pokemon Generation 1, but still about execution. You can look at the flat design, but if it's just an empty Pokemon, like that's the problem about the 5th generation. All of these things are just empty Pokemon. If they're trying to copy a design from the 1st generation to capture that in the rebranding that was Pokemon Black and White, because that's just fact. Like, Pokemon Black and White was a reboot. of its own way. They didn't have any existing Pokemon from beforehand. They wanted to put old fans and new fans on the same platform, and they wanted to give new fans more attention in this game than they did for old fans, and it was just an absolute failure because of that. That it didn't have the strengths of the second generation into the third generation, into the fourth generation, because it just kind of threw out everything, tried to push that formula until it worked, and again, like, a lot of these Pokemon designs are just terrible, and for the very small handful of designs, it also doesn't work out. It's like, okay, cool, Zoroark's cool, but I was never a fan. I was never a fan of Hydreigon. People are like, oh man, look at this. I'm like, Hydra Dragon Hands. Not sold. Just not sold on it at all. I think that the hands are stupid, and that's one of the biggest killers for my thing. And I think it also shows another thing about the 5th generation. Just because you make something look cool, just because you're like, look how edgy and awesome this is, doesn't mean that that automatically makes it good. I think that that's a theme that that a lot of like Generation 5 supporters failed to grasp. That's the same thing for the story. Oh man, look at how deep and complex the story is. It has nothing on the the first generation has nothing on it, therefore it's just immediately better. However, I hate the 5th generation story because it tries hard to push a really cliche and played out story. Oh no, young boy being misused by some parental figure who turns out to be the bad guy. That's really lame. And also the 5th generation, like, I've already done a lot of talks about this, but the story in the 5th generation with the whole, like, PETA Pokemon thing, it's like, oh, wait, it's not right to own Pokemon. That's very disingenuous to Pokemon. That we didn't need to explore that concept because every generation of Pokemon respected Pokemon. 5th generation, they disrespected the whole concept of Pokemon to capture and grow with your Pokemon. They disrespected the designs, they disrespected the depth, and they just went, if we make things cool, if we try really hard, it's going to work. And it didn't work at all, and I think that that's the same. And what I was going to say is, while there are a few cool designs that people point to, there was also more Pokemon introduced in the 5th generation than any other Pokemon generation, so it has the highest potential of just absolute trash Pokemon, and the lowest potential of decent designs. So, even in the context of this video, it just kind of shows that, yeah, like, nothing really worked out. Also caused competitive disbalance, but this is about designs and not everything else about the game itself. 6th generation. Again, I feel it captured whimsy. I think there's two ways of looking at Pokemon. You look at foundation and you look at whimsy. A successful generation captures all that. I feel the only one to really fail on that is the 5th generation, because we're in a new region. We're trying to explore the beauty of France. I feel we get a lot of beauty inside of that. We also get a lot of Pokemon that people have been really looking forward to. That you can do cool fan service, but not make it this over-the-top stuff that you're forcing fans to enjoy. Go-Go. People wanted Goat Pokemon for a while, and even though it's not used competitively, this Pokemon gets a lot of casual love. That this is what the people wanted, they got what they wanted, and a lot of people were happy with it. Same with Pangoro. Dude, we have just an ultimate beat-down panda. Yes, please. And people just love Pancham. Like, Pancham and Skiddo, these guys are adorable. It's going to be fan service. You don't have to have this cool, fully evolved, must-be usable competitive to make something enjoyable. And I think that that's another thing about Pokemon. It's charming. That you can find beauty in the flaws. And I could go into a side rant about League of Legends. I feel the new champion designs in League of Legends, like, let's just make a cool guy that's going to sell as many as possible instead of the humble designs that we saw in the early days of League of Legends. That, you know, if you make something charming but flawed, it can still be enjoyable instead of just utterly garbage looking, or like literally garbage looking, or just something that's supposed to be like, hey, I'm cool, look at me. And even then, the hey, I'm cool, look at me Pokemon, I feel we're a lot better in the 6th generation than the 5th generation. Greninja, Ninja Frog. You succeeded, Game Freak. You got a lot of people to love this Pokemon. I think when they did the 6th generation vote in Japan, Greninja is the #1 fan Pokemon in the franchise for the 6th generation. I think Mimikyu might have taken first slot after that, but Greninja, Ash Greninja and Greninja, Game Freak knew what they were doing, the Pokemon Company knew what they were doing, and it was just an absolutely loved Pokemon, but showed respect. That you can make cool designs and have Pokemon. So the 6th generation did what the 5th generation couldn't, and then still respected the other generations before it with some really awesome designs. A lot of people didn't like the 6th generation. I think that's just backlash. And the weird thing is, I don't understand any of the hate with the Generation 6 Pokemon designs. I just feel like it was 5th generation fans that got upset, because the term Gen 1er is supposed to represent anyone one that only cares about the first generation Pokemon and hates everything outside of that. True Gen 1ers literally do not exist. It just became a turn, oh, you don't like 5th generation, you don't like it when Pokemon does something new, Gen 1er, and then 6th generation comes out and people fell in love with the Pokemon. So it's like, hey, look at that. New Pokemon that people love. You can't use the nostalgia glasses argument. You can't use the Gen 1er argument. It's just that the 5th generation had worse Pokemon designs. That when you just kind of look at it, there weren't a lot of new Pokemon introduced, but they were all really good designs as a whole. Sure, there was a couple of like really weird ones. I wasn't a huge fan of Pyroar, Barbaracle, and I think that was it when it came to Pokemon I didn't like. Then I picked up Barbaracle competitively, and the Pokemon grew on me. So again, you can have an intentionally ugly or poor design that at least finds traction somewhere and gains appreciation, instead of just making bad for the sake of being bad, like we saw in the 5th generation. I have no other way of describing. Okay, Chestnut. I also am not a fan of Chestnut anyway. So that's kind of it. Like, you can actually, this was a really condensed and a really high success for the 6th generation Pokemon, and then we get to the most recent with the 7th generation. Say what you want about Pokemon Sun and Moon and its games, but the 7th generation is one of the strongest generations that Pokemon has ever created, because the designs, incredibly successful Pokemon. The actual world building that we get for the Alola region is massive to the Pokemon world, and it pays respect to Pokemon. Very strong stuff right here, and it has some of my most favorite Pokemon ever introduced. So once again, nostalgia glasses. That argument doesn't work anymore. We have a fan from the beginning that has just not been a fan of Generation 5, loving Pokemon from the earliest to the newest. And I think we can see that. Like, okay, again, a couple of designs didn't work, Bruxish, but we have crazy tropical triggerfish. I'm not a fan of Komodo at all. One of my least favorite pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Not a big fan of the Sandcastle Pokemon, but it had incredibly high highs. Like, when it was a successful design, it was something amazing on the 6th generation. Introduced Mimikyu, one of my favorite Pokemon of all time. Like, thinking about the 7th generation, whenever we were getting new reveals for Pokemon, it was kind of mixed. You know, some of them I was like, I don't like it, I do like it, but they grew on me really quick. Because again, I could understand, it's like, this is a Pokemon, and it works as a Pokemon. And again, with the 1st, 2nd generations, all the generations, I could find things I didn't like about their designs, but I could respect them as Pokemon, which was just not possible in the 5th generation. Like, type Null, once you get into that lore into Slow Valley, Pokemon grows on me. Like, the 7th generation was just so big on trying to develop Pokemon that it just worked. And then the Alola Pokemon, calling back to the 1st generation, I don't see it as this nostalgic fan service, we need to stop catering to old Pokemon fans. It's like, dude, we made a meme, we made Faticate, we kind of grew on some of the older Pokemon, and then we just had some of the coolest designed Pokemon ever. Alolan Marowak, oh, look at this boy right here. We go into Lavender Town Ghost. We get that Spirit Fire on the bone, and then we get an awesome, just dark design inside of it. Yes, please. So I wasn't disappointed. Same with 6th generation. Like, as the reveals were coming out for 6th generation Pokemon, just thumbs up all the way. Just thumbs up. But it represents the region. It represents a lot of the cool things that you can get out of it. And again, a very compact generation, but something that brought a lot of really cool stuff as well. So I think that was the breakdown. This video is going on really long. I did want to talk about the development of pseudo-legendary Pokemon, but that might have to wait for another video, just kind of comparing the designs of the pseudo-legendaries and how it relates to the region. Because you look at Dragonite, yeah, that was the most powerful Pokemon. You know, lore-wise, design-wise, that like, oh, we have the only dragon evolutionary line in the 1st generation. This is your big, bad, high-stat dragon Pokemon that's supposed to wreck everything. Look at how cute and just not fluffy, but, you know, pudgy. Like, that's a very simple, kid-friendly dragon design. And I think it really shows that, again, you can represent power in ways that aren't just design. You can make something cool that doesn't have to look amazing. And it kind of bounces back into what all these generations of Pokemon work on the designs and discussion. So guys, enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.